I love breathing new life into old devices. Today, I'm going to do something I've been dreaming about for years. Build a game for one of my favourite phones of all time. To do this, we'll dive deep into the Nokia 8210's firmware, explore the tools third-party developers wrote to modify these phones over 2 decades ago, then patch our own code directly into the firmware and see how much life is still left inside a piece of technology that first went on sale in 1999. The 8210 is one of the smallest and lightest phones of all time, yet it would run for days between recharging. It feels ridiculously small and light in the hand, as light as a feather. The 8210 also has interchangeable front covers. At the time, Nokia were more than a brand, they were a customizable personal experience, a statement of your personality. Let's do a really quick teardown. Under the front cover is just 6 screws, and it comes apart. Under the screen and keypad is just a single mainboard, filled with a high density of chips and components. It's such an elegant internal design. And have a look at all that gold. Phones of this era used much more gold than our modern phones today. There were complaints from users at the time about its fragility. It's still a beautiful piece of hardware though. 26 years later, and I still think it's one of the most elegant phones Nokia ever made. But in today's video, I'm looking more at the software this phone runs. Nokia phones of this era always had a very easy-to-use menu system. The interface was designed to be fast and intuitive with every function. But I want to start today by looking at the games. The 8210, like almost every Nokia at the time, came with several games embedded in the firmware. These include memory, logic, rotation, and the extremely well-known Snake game. Memory, logic, and rotation are simple puzzle games, but nicely engaging, whereas Snake is much more action-oriented. Snake was originally conceived in the 1970s, but it wasn't until its inclusion by Nokia that made it truly famous. While all these games are quite engaging in their own way, they don't really push the limits of what this hardware platform can do. And I think we can do better. So, let's get into it. The advantage of these early DCT3-based Nokia phones is there's nothing protecting the firmware from being modified, such as a locked bootloader or code signing. If you know how to write the code, the phone is yours. Back in the late 1990s and into the early 2000s, an entire community formed around that idea. People reverse engineered Nokia's firmware and built their own development tools. The challenge today is that these phones were designed to be serviced through a set of contacts hidden underneath the battery. Adapters do exist, but they're increasingly difficult to find. They can sometimes be found for sale online, or better yet, 3D printed. The other challenge is the interface itself. When reflashing the firmware, the Nokia 8210 actually communicates over 2 separate serial connections. A slower 9600 bits per second M bus is used for control and programming commands, while a much faster 115 kilobits per second F bus is responsible for transferring the firmware itself. To reflash the phone, both serial connections must be active at the same time. Back in the 1990s, modders found a way to inexpensively talk to both of these serial interfaces, using special pins on the parallel port. That's also why this doesn't work with USB to parallel port adapters. The flashing software has to talk directly to vintage parallel port hardware. There were other ways developed to reflash these phones using USB, but that requires expensive dedicated hardware boxes. So it's time to break out some more vintage hardware. My newly restored 1997 Sony VAIO 505. With its port expansion module and parallel port, I can finally get back into some early Nokia reprogramming. I've recently installed Windows 98 2nd edition on this laptop. This also does still have its original Japanese Windows 95 on here that shipped with the machine, and also the Japanese Windows 98 multi-boot installation. See the recent Japanese exclusives and Sanctuary Tech videos for more details on those OS installs. The interface that I'm using is this highly modular setup that I built years ago in the Secrets of the 3310 video. There's an RJ45 connector on here that enables me to swap from the original 3310 adapter to this 8210 adapter. These adapters take over the battery compartment, so I originally built the frame out of an old Nokia 3310 into which I can put a battery to externally power the phone. The 8210 is very closely related to the Nokia 3310, which came out the following year. They run almost identical software. Everything I'm doing in this video is also possible on the 3310. Another important interface to have is a serial port M-bus only connection, which in my case I've again built to be adaptable in this setup, though it can get frustrating for me to switch over to it. I may need to fix that. This interface is very useful for using extra functions in NokiX, such as unlocking and doing a full factory reset on the phone, which is sometimes necessary to fix invalid checksums. The flashing process usually takes about 5 minutes or so for a full flash. NokiX shows you what it's doing, one block at a time. You'll find links in the description to the software I'm using in this video. The original websites are gone, many of the developers disappeared from the internet years ago, yet in 2026 their tools still work. To first test the firmware reflashing, I have found a couple of pre-modded 8210 firmwares from the 2000s. And there it is, that looks like it worked fine. These often come with a list of mods that had been patched into them by the developer. I particularly like this custom firmware with its completely redesigned menu system. It's got new fonts and features. The creativity here is awesome. This must have been a lot of work. I also like checking the games menu to see if any customizations have been done there. In this case, I don't see any. So it's time to start modifying some firmware for myself. To do this, I'm going to use the excellent NokiX software developed by Yak with assistance from the Nokia modding community of the 2000s. The actual firmware modding is done using Rex-based NokiX NRX scripts. This allows for a huge amount of flexibility for patching code into many different Nokia models. NokiX is incredibly powerful. It takes care of analyzing firmware, finding available free space in the memory, inserting code, text and graphics, and hooking everything into the main firmware functions. While many different firmware versions can be used, it's usually recommended to only use later versions. I'm using firmware 5.31, which I believe was the last firmware version released for the 8210. It can sometimes be quite tricky to get a successful patch working. I found using the earlier NokiX 1.38 version is working better in most cases. I'm going to start by adding 3 new games to this firmware. All 3 are third-party made games from the modding community in the 2000s. I'm also using a kill MCU check script to bypass firmware checksum issues. There's also the later NokiX version 1.40. This version uses different support scripts. It's best not to get these mixed up as I've been learning. I've spent days trying different combinations of versions, scripts, and supporting macros. There have been lots of challenges. It's been quite an effort. But when the patching works, you'll get a patched firmware output file ready to flash directly into the phone, and I'm keen to see if this works. Okay, there we go. Let's go into the games menu, and there they are. We now have New Pogadi, which is a clone of the Electronica game of the same name. which is itself a clone of the Game & Watch game Egg. Rotator looks really interesting, though it doesn't show any instructions in the game, so I don't know exactly what to do yet. Stones is good. Try to get 5 stones in a line. It's not easy. Also, Bit of Pipe is really cool, and I remember I've tested this game before. I also wanted to try a few games that I've not seen before, such as Tilt Maze. And have a look at that. It's also possible to patch Snake 2 into firmware. This was officially shipped, but only with later Nokia models. Though, on the 8210, Snake 2 doesn't seem to want to run correctly. I tried quite a few games that I was unable to run at all, and some even crashed the phone on power up. I suspect many of these were made for NokiX 1.40, which I need to learn more about. Both of the versions of NokiX I'm using also run on modern Windows, making learning all this a bit easier in some ways. I wanted to have another look at some of my favourite games that I remember from my original Nokia DCT3 video many years ago. This is 3D Maze, and it's more of a tech demo, but I really love this. A full 3D maze to explore with an optional map function. It seems to run much faster on here than I remember when I tried this on the original Nokia 6110. The 8210 must have a faster CPU compared to earlier models. And possibly one of the best third-party games available is Breaker by Yak. Gameplay is really fast on here, maybe even too fast, but it's awesome. And there are sound effects, and there are paddle mods and bonuses, and there's a levels file which can be edited to make custom level layouts. This game is fantastic, but I want more. The time has come to realise my dream of adding my own code. And the first game I've decided to make for my 8210 is Conway's Game of Life. This game was originally written in 1970, making it older than even the original 1974 Snake game. Yet it's so much better. Using only 4 simple rules, a complex world of cellular automata can be formed. It's so complex that this game is actually Turing complete, meaning that like Minecraft, a fully operational computer can be created to run inside the game itself. To this day, both Minecraft and Game of Life remain the 2 most famous examples of Turing complete games. With just 4 simple rules driving Game of Life, and code examples available for dozens of languages, porting this game is the perfect project for me to begin with on the 8210. The game first needs to start with being written in C source code. NokiX comes with a full SDK, including a custom version of VHAM for compiling the C source code into a Nokia-compatible binary. The firmware binary is then encoded using custom scripts into the final NokiX firmware patching script. NokiX also has a separate debugging tool that can talk to the phone over serial when running custom code on the phone. I've not been able to get this to work yet, but fortunately I haven't needed to, thanks to all the documentation and many source code examples that come with most of the third-party games. I had to run through the entire compiling and patching processes many times, learning each step in the toolchain, and then finally getting the patch working into the firmware without errors. And here it is, my first fully working custom code, operating, generating new life. I can start and stop auto generation, I can step through one generation at a time, I can draw individual cells as needed, or clear the entire screen, or just make a random sandbox, or even add a glider gun. I love how this turned out. I'd like to add more predefined shapes, but this is enough for now. I want to see what other things I can do with this phone. Since I love the 3D maze game and would love to try making a 3D game of my own, I did some further experimenting with all the new development tools available today. I decided to test what I could generate using LLM-assisted code development. And this is the result. What do you think? Should I proceed down this path? This is a much more powerful platform than I had previously assumed. This has been a wild journey through decades of forgotten software, mind-bending frustrations, and finally colliding into an uncertain future. But along the way, I learned so much, and it's filling me up with new life.